I had secret siblings living in my attic, but I wasn't allowed to talk about them. I was not let to speak with the boy with wings, brother of mine. But I couldn't call him that anymore. His mother claimed he should have been an angel, except I understood what angels looked like, the biblically authentic ones as well as the idealized versions from movies. More like a crow, a terrible bird-like thing spliced with a sick male adolescent college student he was. My brother lacked even a name. He was to my parents like a stray animal choosing them. Neither loved nor wanted in the house was he. Conversely, he was also an angel, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to see something that defied the rules of physics, with power unlike anything else. Like my sister, he was lost kid of the heavens, those ethereal entities who choose to walk on Earth after falling thousands of years. When a baby, he had saved my life. Mom likes to tell me every year on my birthday that I wouldn't be alive if it weren't for the angels in our attic, my adopted brother and sister. I was so small that I don't recall it. I was born only little early and had little chance of surviving one night. Mom claimed to pray non-stop in search of a miracle and to be visited by the two entities using their heavenly force, therefore providing life. Mom pleaded with them to stay and watch after me until I was old enough to fend for myself when I pulled through. When I go back to my first memory, it is the angels looking after and guarding me. Back then, they really appeared cherubic. Perhaps it is simply how I recall them. While my sister's wings were more grayish, my brother carried massive white wings almost like a swan. They used to smile and laugh. For a period, we were real siblings, but I saw less of them growing up. Mom would whisk them away from our middle of some mischief, and I wouldn't see them for days, perhaps weeks. I considered the angels to have gone away back home at last. Sadder than anything else, I suppose, my older siblings had disappeared. I was a small child. Mom and Dad informed me my siblings were now in the attic when I started hearing noises upstairs. The familiar sound of their wings scraping against hardwood flooring and the disintegrating ceiling. They stayed safe upstairs since it was too risky for them. This meant no more playing with them, and particularly no more mentioning them to friends and relatives. Mom took great rigidity with me. "They are magical beings, Nini," she said one evening before bed. "Many nasty people out there will want your brother and sister for evil purposes. So, all right, we should stay quiet about them." The following day, I arrived at school and sketched a picture of the two of them playing with me. My teacher softly drew me aside at the end of class. "Are I in danger?" She laughed when I asked, pointing for me to take a seat. "No, you're not in trouble. I would want to discuss the class artwork you produced." Well, knowing my commitment to Mom, I shuffled on my chair. I was not allowed to discuss the attic angels. My teacher said, holding up this quite beautiful sketch, "This is a very pretty drawing, Nini. Are angels among them?" I gave a quick nod, enthusiastic. "They are my sister and brother." Her vision clouded. She pushed back on her chair. "Oh, apologies quite a bit. I didn't mean—" "No, my siblings are still alive," I responded. "They reside in the attic and are angels." Her smile, I recall, was a bit too wide. She bent forward, plucking my drawing from my hands. "Does anyone have names?" "No," I said to her matter-of-factly. "They are not allowed names." Her smile wavered just a little. "Sweetie, what do you mean they're not permitted names?" Usually, Mrs. J was my preferred instructor, but I could already feel her developing discomfort. I feigned not to notice her prying her nails into my work. I told her exactly what Mom told me. "Because they are angels," I laughed. "They are not in need of human names." Mrs. J nodded and returned my sketch to me. "Sweetie, could we keep this between you and me? I know I'm not supposed to ask this, and I'll definitely get in trouble." I nodded, my stomach knotting itself. Perhaps I was saying the incorrect thing. Good. Her countenance darkened dramatically as my teacher leaned forward. Let me back up a few months. Mrs. J had missed some time. She used to be vibrant and happy, ever eager to teach us. She returned weeks later, however, aloof and somewhat hollow. Her smiles were forced, and even now I could tell my teacher was unhappy when I sat in front of her, sporting an enormous grin. Knowing that my siblings were angels made me feel bad. I could definitely help her heal. Mom's rules would never let that. Nini, could you perhaps describe the appearance of these angels? I gave a shrug. Well, they have wings. That is clear. No, Nini, Mrs. J said as she stabbed at the sketch, running her index over my sister's stick-person face, my brother's curls in brown cloud, and my own thick red hair in a blurry, crayoned haze. Though I would have drawn their halos above their heads, I never saw them. Still, I could see big, feather-like wings. What sort of angels these are? I was poised to respond, but Mom stuck her head inside. She smiled at my teacher, who, to my astonishment, tucked the drawing in her pocket. Nini, it's time to go home, honey. Mom observed her trying to hide my image rather clearly. Her arms already defensively crossed over her chest, and I watched her posture harden somewhat. Mrs. J, is there a problem? My teacher sprang to her feet, once more posing her smile. I was merely chatting to Nini about her homework. Mom nodded slowly, keeping her face. She cleared her throat and apologized about your children. They were so small. They're my babies, the teacher's voice broke. You certainly grasp the loss experienced by a mother. Please pardon me. I'm here if you want to talk, Mom said. We all know Adam enjoyed experimenting with recreational drugs. Mrs. J's grin wavered, and I sensed a change from my teacher to a parent. I need not your pity, she spat. If I tell you straightforwardly, I will lose my sanity if I hear one more person say everything is under control. Thank you. Nevertheless, I do not want your apology. I'm not interested in your sympathies. Her voice broke, and I felt compelled to hug her right now. I observed my teacher unlock my laptop, apparently ignoring my mother. If you're going to stand there and waste my time, I suggest you leave. Mrs. J caught my eye, her lips curling into a scowl. Mrs. J pulled out my sketch and laid it on the desk. Your daughter's imagination is rather unique. Mom grabbed the artwork, widening her eyes, then gently drew me from the room with her hand around my wrist. I inquired why my teacher was so agitated in the car headed home. Mom responded slowly, leaving me sinking in awkward silence for some while. I knew she had the artwork. I knew I was in trouble. I anticipated her to lecture me, but instead she bought me chocolate ice cream from a drive-thru. She cleared her throat while I was dining on it. Mom continued, her fingers tight around the wheel. Mrs. J lost her children. She craves a miracle, and you gave her hope with your drawing. Mom removed it from her pocket and, to my horror, tore it up and flung it out the window. I watched it settle in a puddle. The crayonized smile of my brother vanished beneath the muddy water. Nini, did you mention your brother and sister to Mrs. J? I said nothing. Ice cream crept back up my throat. Mom murmured once more, Nini. I shook my head, lied no, then caved when she looked at me. I just said there are angels living in the attic. Mom nodded gingerly. Did you say they were real angels? None. Did she find out what they looked like? My eyes streaming with tears, I grumbled, I'm not a fan of the interrogation. I don't know. No. She just loved my drawing. Mom twisted her lip. You're absolutely sure, Nina, because if you're lying, bad people will come and take your siblings. She only called me Nina when I got in hot water. Certainly. Mom sighed with relief as she slanted back into her seat. She said, "That's good." And I flinched when she turned to face me and squeezed my hands firmly. "Because we cannot have anyone taking them away, sweetheart. They are your angels." That day, I was not allowed to even mention the angels in our attic. Should I have, either purposefully or unintentionally slipped, I was ordered to my room right away. The issue was that, whether angels or not, these two were still my brother and sister, no matter how many times I was advised not to talk about them or totally ignore their presence. During Thanksgiving dinner, about 10 years ago, I told my aunt about them. It was a slipped tongue error. We were all exchanging our hopes for the next year, so I had lifted up my glass of juice, repeating my parents' toast, and said, "I wish I could see my brother and sister who are in the attic again." She assumed I was kidding. Aunt Jules spluttered on her own wine, and I watched the glance she shot my mother. Mom had already set numerous glasses of water in front of her, but she was ignoring all of them. Mom already had tomato cheeks and laughed a little too much for an adult lady. She laughed, eyebrows twitched. "Is there anything you should tell me?" Mom lowered her own glass gently, lips close to the rim. "Jules, you know my daughter has an overactive imagination. They're more like imaginary friends." Aunt Jules straightened in her seat. Then her smile vanished. "That's not what I wanted to talk about," she turned to me, color draining from her cheeks. "Nini, I need to talk to your mother. Why not you go upstairs to your room?" "No, it's okay. I am nearly an adult too." I grinned at my aunt. Dad mumbled, swallowing mounds of mashed potatoes. "Nina, you are 8 years old." I stayed steadfastly still, not moving. I reasoned that if I stayed as still as I could, the parents would not know it was past my bedtime. Mom's tone, "Nina," was a threat. "Go upstairs." Reluctantly dragging myself upstairs, Dad grabbed me up and carried me all the way to my room and put me into bed when I tried to listen in on the talk and hid on the stairway. I fell asleep even though I thought I would keep awake and strain my ears to hear the discourse. Something damp slinkers down my cheek, waking me. Opening my eyes, I was fixated on one puddle of scarlet pooling from my ceiling. I sat up, running fingers down my face. Blood, specifically. My heart thumping, I leaped out of bed when a lone feather brushed my cheek. Rather than asking for my parents, I reached for my pink chair from under my dressing table and positioned it under the crimson stain. I hopped on it, sliding my fingers over scarlet while standing on my tiptoes and risking 3 times knock-through. To my amazement, there came a reply, 2 single knocks. I asked, pushing my forehead to the ceiling so they may hear my voice. "Are you okay?" 1 more single knock. None. 1 ice cold slithered down my spine. I made another try. "Are you offended?" Indeed, his voice sounded like a gentle sob. Hearing my brother's strained voice, I jumped, almost falling from the chair. When I really listened, pushing all the sound out of my head, the gentle hum of my bedside lamp, and my parents downstairs fighting with my aunt, his cries split across the silence. I pictured him forcing his face on the floor. "What are you doing?" I asked almost quickly as I jumped off the chair and heard his movements, his wings scraping the floor. "Nini." My fingers curled around the elegant handle. I arrived just at the entrance. "I told Mom you were hurt and you needed help." "Wait, not." His tone's desperation stopped me cold. It's just a broken wing," he said. "I'm okay. It will heal." I stayed with him, steadied on my chair for hours, not sure what to do. He seemed to enjoy the anecdotes I shared from my best-selling novels. He even knew the names of the characters before I spoke about them. I took a blanket from my bed and leaned into the chair when I started to nod off. "What's your name?" After an awkward pause, he responded, "I don't know. Mom said angels don't have names." I said, corrected. Okay, so may I name you? He rolled onto his side and I heard that. Absolutely. Simba, I said, looking at my pillow-mounted pet lion. He laughed and I knew I had never heard an angel laugh before. It sounded exactly like my own. That's not a proper name. Peter, I was scowling over my rough Narnia copy. He groaned. Nah, not sure if that describes me. I grabbed a haphazard book and turned pages, then asked, okay then, how about Jude? Jude, the angel said, wallowing the name about his mouth. I like it. I nodded enthusiastically, then asked, what about our sister? Lily. The little squeak originated with the angel child herself. She hushedly, I like the name Lily. After at last calling them, they began to seem more to me like siblings. I felt good about it. Originally salted crackers, I started sneaking food up to the attic, holy water from my mother's fountain. But angels are ravenous and particularly like junk food and snacks. To escape being caught, I first pushed the food through the floorboard cracks, but then I grew bold and started dragging my old Nintendo Deer and an old Monopoly game up there. After ascending a rickety wooden ladder and gently removing numerous floodboards to enable me to pull myself through, I had to squeeze through a suffocating space. Once I was done, though, I was excitedly clutching games and food, my DS sliding through my fingers. I had never gone inside the attic before. I was told it was for storage when I asked what was inside, except the room for storage smelled sterile. Jude's shuddy voice shocked me. Could you put the floorboards back? I'm cold. Jude and Lily, the two figures sprawled against the wall, brought my heart into my throat. Since they were hauled away from me when I was playing, I had not seen them since I was a little child. I had grown up with their voices bleeding through my roof and imagined them much older. Their age remained the same, precisely the same though. Early 20s, maybe older. The identical angels I used when a youngster were pallid, thin in the face, almost skeletal. College students, or perhaps older. Their wings were always lovely and swan-like, magnificent, otherworldly. But this was not what I remembered. I could feel my breaths become weighty and a shudder slink down my spine. Not even convinced I was viewing an angel at all. Their wings were ragged and frayed, hardly fastened to their backs, heavy, and quite obviously dragging them down. I distinctly remembered my brother's wings being flawless when I was a young child. The reason they were there, or how, was that they were angels and human rules did not apply to them. But what I was seeing did have an explanation. Jude's wings were not attractive. Instead, inexplicable phenomenons sprang from his back. I could see exactly where his naked spine sprang from his flesh, split in two, where horrible feathered appendages like wings erupted, spliced through a dirty t-shirt, in the ghostly white light buzzing over me. Like I was going to damage them, I stumbled a step forward them and saw the two of them stiffening. Mom lied. That was all I could think. She claimed they had food, blankets, and books, and that they were glad to be kept hidden in our attic. It dawned on me that this room above our house was not a safe place to guard our angels the more time I had to consider what I was seeing. The wall and ceiling were sterile white. The light was fluorescent and brutal. But the angels themselves lacked logical consistency. My brothers looked out of place, shackled in painful chains biting their ankles and wrists against the backdrop of what felt and looked almost like an operating theater. I moved another step farther, binding them to the walls themselves as well as to the very foundations preserving the house together. From the arm of my sister, a long plastic tube flowing into her was protruding out, more near. Another larger tube, this one filled with clear liquid, stuck straight from the incision cut where Jude's spine broke in two. I saw rivulets of red beading down Jude's back. His wings shook, individual feathers tried to compress, trying to spread wide, folded into hideous flaps, and I pretended not to notice the metal clamp squeezed within bloody slithers of flesh. Lily sat uneasily, her back to the wall, strawberry blonde hair flanking her eyes. I saw one single plastic tube lodged in her arm. Her lips parted and her wings readily opened when she moved back, suggesting better condition. Mom and Dad were not shielding the angels from without. On them, they were testing something. Jude mumbled, gently nudging the girl. "It's okay, then, just Nini." Lily's tired eyes locked with half-closed eyes fighting to keep awake. My eyes hurting, I bent slowly in front of them. I pulled dirty brown hair from his dream eyes, but he barely pointed at the DS I dropped on the ground before I could talk. His words was a muddled mumble. My eyes followed the tube mercilessly jutting from his spine. "Does that have Mario?" "No, I held it up so he could see the screen," I said, "but I do have Nintendogs." His query caught me off guard. I shuffled back, grabbed the DS, swiped dust from the screen, slid the power on, and his eyes lit up. Jude grinned, but I wasn't looking for projecting sharp incisors coming from his gums. "Sounds entertaining." Holding out his chained wrists, he asked, "Do you want to play?" I had so many questions, but at that time, staring at the creases in my brother's expression, when he was in anguish, I swallowed my words. I toyed with them till the heavens darkened. When I was packing, I couldn't resist approaching forward, my heart jumping in my chest. His wings trembled, his eyes widened as I tried to extract the tube from his spine. "Don't!" Jude slid away, his wings twitching, writhing beneath the clamp. I stood immobilized, like an animal. Jude hissed, his breaths came out in harsh pants, his fingernails, almost like claws, sliding over wooden boards. "Don't fucking touch me," he spat. "Do you understand?" I stayed still, his face relaxed and his teeth withdrew. "I'm sorry," he responded. "It just... My mom and dad are hurting you," I said, finishing for him, choked on my own sob. Jude did not respond for a moment. His head twitched then. "Do you remember that one time you wanted to fly? You jumped off the bunk bed, broke your arm, and we ran for your mum? We love you and we care about you. But we need help now, too." You nodded. "Do you have a pen and paper?" I did. I carried an entire coloring pad for sketching. I nodded, gave him a blank piece of paper and a crayon. Jude wrote a number and passed it to me, whispering, "Can you call this number?" I nodded. "Why?" "As an angel, is it like part of your jaw?" His face wrinkled, but he replaced it with a smile. "Yeah, it's a job." He leaned back, wincing when his wings brushed against the ceiling, clearly in discomfort. "I have been here shielding you for so long. I have to visit all the other kids," Lily murmured, shoving Jude as he rolled his eyes. "Knock it off." His smile was sour. "Why? Aren't we just doing our jobs?" Feeling hopeful, I left the attic with a mission. I was going to phone the special angel number and assist my brother in his work. Mom was cooking supper, thus it was easy to divert her. I made a big production about dessert, and when she was muttering to herself, getting materials for cookies from the pantry, I took my mother's phone from her purse, locked myself in the toilet, and dialed the number. My fingers were all clammy. I was really excited. My ear heard the dial tone. Then, before anyone picked it up, "Hello?" Mom was unlocking the door and yanking her phone from my reach before I could talk. She yelled, "Nini, what are you doing?" apologizing to the receiver. "No, I have no idea how she got your number. Have a great night." She shot me the dagger eyes, then walked away, her phone to her ear. Mom cooked me cookies instead of snapping. She sat against the counter, arms folded. "Nini, I'm going to ask you a question, and you're going to tell the truth." I was chewing on a chocolate one. Dipping my cookies in fondant, I said, "I was working." Her eyebrows wrinkled. "You were working?" I nodded. "I could do his job for one of the angels since he handed me an angel number." Mom's mouth twisted. "Okay then, can I have the angel number?" She sighed as I hesitated. "Nini, I'm sure he would rather an adult was doing his job for him." She held out her hand. "Sweetie, I don't want to ask you again." I passed it over, words choked from my throat suddenly. "Why are you hurting them?" Mom turned, startled, her eyes widening. "Nini, why on earth would you think we are hurting them?" My voice cracking, I replied, "I saw them. You're doing bad things to their wings." Mom hugged me, and I found myself splintering apart, burying my head in her bosom. She muttered, "Nina, sweetie, you are very, very wrong," wrapped her arms around me. Mom said, "They're sick," running her fingers through my hair. "When they brought you back to life as a child, they were so weak, so they couldn't fly away. We didn't tell you because we didn't want to scare you." I nodded, wriggling my mother to my chest. Everything made logical. Their wings were corrected. "Your father and I have been working to save them," she said. She stepped away from the hug, wiping away my tears. "Of course, with them being so powerful, we have no choice but to take extra measures, which, yes, include chaining them up." "Nina, only chains dipped in holy water will hold them. They are rather strong. Their weakness and less destructive nature were evident in their younger years, but as you observed, they are getting more robust daily." I felt a twingle in my chest. "Then they will fly away," I whispered. Mom pursed her lips but nodded, handing me still another cookie. "Then they will fly away." After then, I didn't pay the angels any visits for some time. Part of me, I suppose, was afraid of their terrible might. I missed them, though, later on. I thus gathered snacks from the kitchen, a handful of DS games Jude would have liked, and slipped out of my room straight for the attic. Except as I ascended the rickety stairs, all the loose flooring going to the attic had been replaced. I thought of telling them by tapping on my ceiling, but running to my room when I got home from school, my bedroom was out of bounds. "We're redecorating," Mom said with a brilliant smile. "For now, you will be sleeping in our room." How could I get in touch with them? My room had brand new ceiling when it was completed. Balancing on my chair, I knocked all night waiting for a reply. Never once did I had one. I did pick them out, though. Their agonized screams pierced my walls in the middle of the night, waking me. As though our house sensed their suffering, I watched their blood pouring through the walls, the ceiling, scattered feathers choking the air. I tripped on ragged bits of their wings pricking my bare feet as I slipped from bed. Blood gushed thick, staining porcelain when I turned on the faucet to wash my face. They have to be sick enough to nearly experience human feeling. Half wondered if they were asking their father when I heard their wails, their cries for death. Heaven. Mom told me over breakfast that the angels were deadly sick. She advised me to pray for them, and I did, stooped over my frozen crystals. I prayed their father would save them and hear them, as if they had saved me. Their cries ended finally. My mother started crying when Dad declared they were at last steady. I ignored my tweens when I hit my teens. Though I knew the sick angels in my attic, as a teenager I suppose my interests were more in experimenting with my sexuality and hanging out with pals. That didn't mean, though, they didn't exist. I started college when I was 18, but I still paid visits for holidays. At last I noticed them once more, ignoring the lad with frayed, white wings protruding out from his spine and the slit in his shirt as he dragged himself downstairs, stealthily into our refrigerator proved difficult. What this Jude was unknown to me. He was not like the one I came upon in the attic. That youngster still felt suffering and looked like a human. This man seemed more bird-like with his talon-like fingernails and twisted spine showing out from his back. But his wings were larger, his spine buried beneath a blood-stained garment hanging on him. Always bent over, he moved slowly, his formerly human features hidden by thick, dark hair over his eyes. I tried to overlook the dirt caught between his toes and the scarlet path from the refrigerator to the door. Stuck his face straight into a frosted cake my mother produced, he barely acknowledged me. As he chewed through the cake, swung his head up, swallowed it down, exactly the way I would have seen a crow eating bread. I watched, fascinated, maybe a little repulsed. When his eyes did find me, they were practically empty and beady. Ignoring me, he sniffed about the cupboard on his tiptoes. Jude, I discovered I was pronouncing his name, and it felt and sounded alien. He opened a package of candy bars and ignored. He was gassing a Snickers bar as I turned to swallow bile. Jude's illness actually had changed him from an angel into something else. His body seemed more of a hideous distortion of human and angelic form. Every person as keen as a needlepoint. His bones jut out in odd places. His wings are a lot better and sturdier, but much sharper. "Your age is really old," I asked nonchalantly. "I'm almost 19, and you've been 19 for most of my life, but you're also an angel, so that would make you like old." It was a joke. I was hoping he would have kept his childhood humor. I recalled telling him a joke, and he laughed, like a true, proper chuckle. Once more, Jude. He turned around and dropped chocolate slabs down his chin. It dawned on me as he gently slanted his head, beady eyes flickering. He was either unable to completely understand me or at least was straining. I watched his eyes fix on my lips. He was going over my words. I stood gently. I had little time while Mom and Dad were shopping. "Why not you fly away if you have wings?" With arms full of munchies, Jude pulled his trembling body to the door. One arm whirling, curled nails gripping the door, the other grabbing salted chips. I did not expect him to chuckle. His laughter was unusual, more of a bird-like squawk than human. He saluted me with his candy bar instead of talking, then turned away, still singing to himself. 2 weeks later, I caught a glimpse of Lily. Her wings were bigger than her, terrible gray appendages ripping her spine in two. Lily's garments hung just barely on her emaciated form. She was leaned over with one chain around her ankle. She headed straight to the kitchen faucet, turned on the stream of water, gulped ravenously, her fang-like teeth cutting silver. I could not tolerate it anymore when she dropped to her knees, weighted down by her wings. I pushed the door wide toward the patio. I forced myself to choke out, pointing outdoors. "Fly. I am not going to inform Mom." I saw her yearning to be free, desperation crumpling her effort at a grin. She nodded and shot for the door. Her wings weren't sturdy enough, hence as much as I could, I got duct tape and reinforced them. Pulling off my jacket, I placed it over her shoulders and hugged her. She stayed silent. Her neck was more bird-like, slimmer, and I wasn't sure whether she still had vocal cords either. "She couldn't probably go," I urged, midway to the door. "I will go pick your brother." She crossed the doorway, grinning somewhat brokenly. She was very near, that cold air on her skin reflected in wide, expectant eyes full of tears. I saw her fly up, spreading her wings up. I fretted and closed the front door when someone knocked on it. "Go!" He snipped. "Hello?" Steps forward. My mother was not among them. "Frida." The kitchen door swung open, an all too familiar face, then a painful scream. "Serena?" It took me half a second to see my former elementary school teacher staring at Lily from the doorway with wild eyes. Her hands covering her mouth, I watched her go slowly forward, faltering. She sobbed, "Serena. Oh God, my baby." Her mouth began to twist and I felt her scream anchored in my skull, her eyes fixed on the wings of the girl. What did they treat you like? What did they do? Bango. Reality blasted into me in an ice wave in the time it took the angel to drop to the ground and her mother trailing suit. Lily smashed onto the terrace, scarlet all around. She was not a heavenly messenger. Nina! Mom was standing in the doorway carrying a shotgun. Jude stood next her, his mouth choked by my mother's fingers and eyes crazy. Mom? Jude muted, his eyes locked on my teacher, crushed on the ground, his face twisted and wild. He shot forward, his bird-like shriek become more human, like a child's scream. Mom grabbed him back, smashing her hand on his mouth. Mom! Shocked, I watched as she turned on him and stuck the gun between his eyebrows. She spat, "Stay," running the rifle down his naked back. Mom watched his pointed glimpse toward freedom and pushed him down on his knees. "Move and I shoot her." She turned back to find Lily still asleep. He knelt down and raised his hands slowly. "Okay," my mother said, choked out. "So I want to get some things very fucking clear." She was hovering over my primary school instructor in 2 steps. I witnessed her stick the gun's barrel, extend it into the woman's head, and blast her brain matter all over our kitchen floor, sprinkling scarlet and fleshy pink bits on my shoes. The angels responded nothing. Lily slept in her own blood, Jude dead-eyed, staring at his mother. I found it difficult to breathe. Though I knew I had thrown all over myself, I couldn't remember only the thick, acidic sludge running down my face. "You have no mother," Mom spat at Jude. I watched her cradle the boy's face. "You are a fallen angel who descended from the heavens thousands of years ago and now wanders the earth. You spared my daughter. Your miracle was exactly what I needed." Mom had frantic eyes and widened her smile. She grabbed harder, pushing him to stare at her. "Are not you?" His lip curling, he said no. Mom laughed in his direction. She continued, hatred pouring from every word. "Adam, you were your mother's worst enemy. Do you realize how much seeing her own son self-destructing there in front of her disturbed her?" She turned to look at Lily. Serena spit. She was a whore of a woman. "Every day I listened to your mother grip over the 2 of you to cover your nasty, filthy habit. You sold her car, took money for drugs, and even used her medication. Your own father labeled you a shame. Serena was sleeping around. Frankly, Adam, I ought to have left you in that hotel room." She grabbed harder, her well-groomed nails cutting across his skin. "Unconscious, drooling, a needle from your veins protruding out. How fucking pitiful." Trying to jerk from her firm hold, he yelled out, sharp, more like a crow. "I should have let you wreck your body, let your mother find you unresponsive again." Mom moved back to admire him. She said softly, "I gave you wings to save you." Already dragging a corpse bag and bleach, Dad arrived at the door. Mom had to have known that my teacher was on travel. This was, I believe, the point at which I should have acted. But I froze, standing amid pooling blood and fragmented bits of my teacher's skull. I was left with my mother as Dad lugged the angels back to the attic. "Grab me a bucket," she said, as throwing away a body was customary. I talked not with my mother. Rather, I left the house carrying my rucksack. I told the sheriff straight out that I had seen a murder and that 2 missing college students were in my parents' attic. Initially, I doubt they took me seriously. I think my mother turned 2 missing college kids into angels, I should have begun with. Adam and Serena would theoretically be 39 years old. Trying to explain how the 2 of them resembled teens wasn't something I was looking forward. Still, I trailed a dozen cops to my house while seated in the rear of the police cruiser, which was vacant. Mom and Dad were gone. When the cops burst through into the attic, it was merely storage space. There were not any angels visible. The police started pointing the finger at me not long ago. After being brought back to the station and subjected to interrogation, I was freed and then given a lecture about wasting police time. I started my hunt while forced to return home. Jude and Lily had to be somewhere, buried. My parents fleeing with two genetically altered angels seemed unthinkable. Starting in the attic, all I could uncover there were old crates, vintage toys, and a diadem. Mom and Dad covered their tracks really well. Turning now to my parents' room, not much of significance till I crept beneath their bed. Underneath, there was nothing, but the carpet had a bump. An additional loose floorboard. This one brought me down into a shallow document-filled pit. As I spread them around the floor, I came upon Adam and Serena's names. Mom and Dad were keeping records on their development. Day 1. The subjects are composed given our neuromuscular blockers. I'm going to try to cut right through the S1's spine. I will keep you informed about development. Everything appears to be in order thus far. Research and treatments covering 19 years' worth were involved. Still, they continued long beyond Adam and Serena. I came across historical records from years before, from infancy. Names that endured. Nathan, Lily, Charlotte Matthew, Jesse, Victoria, Evangeline. Something horrible slid up my throat. Where were they now if my parents had been experimenting on every one of those people? As I dug further into the elderly subjects, I found my response. Failed stamped was a sea of crimson. My fingers brushed something warm as I descended down into the tiny hole. Something moist, delicate, somewhat feather-like. I turned back as if it were alive and could feel. The ground shook under me and I heard that gentle cry once more. That whirl. I found myself unable to stop. When paint grew slippery and wet bleeding feathers stuck to my palms, I got up, tore at the walls of my parents' room and retreated. My heart in my mouth, I staggered back when one eye blinked back at me. Mom knew just what I needed. She missed something. She fucking lied on virtually everything. Not angels were Jude and Lily. They did not save my baby years. The effective endeavor by our parents to replace what is dwelling inside our walls is Jude and Lily. I think it's disturbed that the angel my house was constructed on had blood splashed all over our walls from its foundations. It wants, I believe, all of its children from past and present back. The walls are bleeding and already I am crying. Floor caving in and the ceiling is falling apart. The angel whispers in my ear a language that bends and distorts my ideas. This is threatening me. I'll die if I neglect to bring back its offspring. Still, I find myself wondering if it is trying to communicate something. Still housed in our house are those that failed? Before I publish the entire thing, I'm revising this page. I couldn't sleep last night. For hours I had been in terrible pain. Running down my fucking spine are lighting bolts. To release the strain, I reached under my shirt and pulled one feather quill from my flesh. What did my parents do with Jude, Lily, and every other child? Will I be their next topic?